We want to talk tonight about, we want to transition from talking about the women's role women's role in the church to the man's role in the family, from the women's role in the family to the man's role in the family. And as you recall, what we've really been doing from a bigger picture standpoint is we've been asking, why has God sent the family home? What does God have in mind for Christian families that He has sent us all, fathers, mothers, and children, back into the house? And we're looking at some things that God is trying to correct in us. And so we began by looking at things that women need to be doing. We looked at the role of men and women in creation, what God made them to do, how they fit into God's perfect design for the family. We took some time and looked at the woman's role and how God desires for her to use her great strengths and intelligence in a dynamic, powerful, rich way at home while the children are young. From the time they're born until they leave the house, God's design is that the woman be there to invest in them. And now we want to switch gears and we want to talk about what God may be saying to fathers and what He is looking for men to correct in the family unit. So let's go and let's look back at this formula that I began to lay out for you last Sunday. The formula for lost children. And if you recall, it's AM, which we saw as absent mother, plus DF times PS equals lost children or lost child. And so today we talked about the absent mother. We said, look, if you want to cause a Christian child to be lost to the world, the first thing you need to do is get the mother out of the house so that the child then has to be raised by someone other than their mother. Well, tonight we want to talk about the second part of this formula, which is disconnected father. The DF stands for disconnected father. So we've got an absent mother plus a disconnected father. And I'll explain to you what that means as we move along this evening. Let's go back to this picture that we've been using as we contemplate and consider what the man is supposed to do. And as he's looking out at creation there, we're sort of envisioning this as sort of an illustration of Adam. He's out there all alone in creation, and he's looking out and he's trying to understand what God made him to do. Now you remember we looked at Genesis chapter 2, and we saw that the man was made by God and then given certain responsibilities by God. Now, in terms of how those responsibilities apply to the family, there really are two. There are two responsibilities that the man has to his family. And the first is he has the role of provider. Remember, God made man His delegate on the earth, and He told man to subdue the creation. And part of that role of subduing creation was his role as the head of the household, as the head of the family. And part of that role is to be provider. He is to provide for his family. The second thing he is to do is he has a role as spiritual leader. Spiritual leader. We hear this term thrown around quite a bit. And in our culture in general, we hear the term leadership. Leader, it just has sort of a ring to it. People kind of glorify leaders. In fact, they have a wrong understanding of what a leader is. But these are the two roles, these are the two places that men in the family are falling short. And this is why God is sending us back home saying, hey, I want you to pay attention. I want you to go back and learn what you're supposed to be doing. Now, tonight we're just going to talk about his role as provider. The next session we will talk about his role as spiritual leader. We don't have enough time to do both of those in one session. So his role as provider, this goes back to the garden. And you remember that before, in Genesis chapter 2, remember Genesis chapter 2 is not another day of creation. It's not a second creation account. It is God giving us the detail of what He did on the sixth day of creation. Remember that He made the land animals and man on the sixth day of creation. Mankind meaning mankind in general, Adam and Eve. But when we look into the detail of Genesis chapter 2, what we see is that God made the man first, and then He told the man to work, and then He made the man a helper. Now we reviewed this a couple of weeks ago, so we won't spend too much time on it, but we need to lay this groundwork again. Genesis 2:15 says that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. So the man had this responsibility to work from the very beginning. God's intent for man individual men was that they work. And you would think that this wouldn't be a point that we would need to make anymore in America. They used to talk about the Protestant work ethic, that the United States was passed on this work ethic where Americans were very hardworking, especially men, from the Protestants that came and settled, many of whom came and settled the nation in the beginning. But today we really have to point out, we have to emphasize this, that the man is to work. A man is to work. And whether it's outside of the Christian church today among non-Christians or whether it's inside the church itself, we have fewer men who are willing to and are functioning in the workplace. They are simply not working. It's kind of the roll of the dice to see if a man is going to be working. A man is supposed to work. God does not intend for a man to be supported by his wife. Now, in each of the cases that I'll mention, there are always exceptions. A man might get hurt on the job, a man might be in a car wreck, a man might get sick. There's just so many different, be out of work, laid off. There's so many different situations. But what we're really trying to do here is lay down the foundational principles, that this is the way God wants things to work, by and large, in a general sense, all the time. And God does not want a man to be supported by his wife. We're sort of getting this upside down now, where the woman is shifting into the role of the man, and the man is kind of either doing nothing and chilling out, or he's, hanging out with the kids. We'll talk about that in a moment. God does not intend that. The stay-at-home dad, again, with exceptions now. There are exceptions and exceptional times and so on. But as a rule, the idea of a stay-at-home dad, while mom is out working and providing for the family, is not in the Bible. This is not a godly concept. This is not what God wants. God made the woman with particular skills, emotional, intellectual, to be able to care for children day in and day out, that He did not give to a man. And the man, he's given certain proclivities when it comes to work, and he is supposed to be out working, providing for the family. It's not a shot at women. It's not a shot at men. Remember, this isn't about who's capable of doing what. Can a man stay home and take care of children? Of course, a man could do that, physically operate and do that. But it's not going to work the way that God designed it. It's not about what you can do. It's not about capability. It's about design. So the concept of a stay-at-home dad is just not in the Bible. If you're a Christian man today, and your wife is, and this is, it's not an exceptional circumstance. There's no reason for it. You've simply chosen that you're going to stay home and your wife is going to work. This is not God's will. This is not God's will. You need to get yourself out that door. You need to get yourself a job and provide so that your wife can come in and do what she has been called and designed to do with the children. But another thing that we're seeing in our culture is we're seeing this move, again, from non-Christians outside of the church, but most concerned about what we see in the church, that men are being supported by the government. Men and families are being supported by the government. It's becoming just so commonplace today. I know in our own neighborhood, we have a number of homes. And, I don't care if this sounds politically correct or not. You can tell people the way they're dressed, the way they carry on, if they've got jobs or not. And you can tell the ones who are getting money from the government. And we've got a number of homes in our own neighborhood that it's clear that they're living in a house as nice as mine, but they're not working. And I know Christian men even. There's this move to get on, if you can't, Social Security is, I'm not talking about Social Security, by the way. If you're a senior, you're retired, then that's a different thing. I'm not talking about retirement benefits from Social Security. I'm talking about these times when men are trying to get on the government payroll when they don't need to be. There are Christian men who are trying to get on disability. I know some Christian men who are on disability, and they started off with a legitimate injury. But instead of working through it and trying to go ahead and stay in the workforce, they get on the government, try and get on the government nickel. But then what they do is they go back and work under the table. I've seen this a number of times. They'll work under the table, so they're Christian, they're getting government benefits, but they're going out and actually working and defrauding the government. That's fraud when you do that. of that money. So if you can go out and work while you're on disability, why can't you work all the time? Why are you on disability? When I was pastoring in Andrews, I had a handyman business, and there was a man, and I'm forgetting his name now. I can see his face, but I was doing some work at a trailer. I was building, remodeling a little bathroom, and I was building a lean-to, sort of replacing a lean-to on the back porch. And this guy said, hey, he looked he looked late 40s, early 50s maybe. He said, hey, I'm a plumber. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. And you could tell he drank a lot. You could just look at the skin color, just the complexion of him, and tell that he was a drinker. But anyway, he was a nice guy, and I said, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll pay you such and such an hour. You come over here and give me some help. And so he helped me. I mean, he basically remodeled that entire bathroom. We got another job, plumbing job, plumbing in a house, plumbing in some PVC pipe under a renovated house. And he got into that crawl space, and he crawled around with me, and we cut pipe, and we glued pipe, and we did all kinds of work. And then one day he calls me, and he says, hey, Wes, I'm not going to be able to work for you anymore. I got my disability. I got my disability. And I said, what are you talking about? He never mentioned anything about it. And yeah, he said, I got my disability. It finally came through. So I won't be able to work for you anymore unless you can pay me under the table. And I said, well, look, I don't pay under the table. And so, he didn't work for me anymore after that. But here's a guy who's crawling around in a crawl space. All right, this is a guy who's replacing an entire shower, but he's getting disability. Now, what is that? What is that? God requires that we work. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't ever disabled. I'm not saying that men don't get hurt where they actually need to be on disability. I'm not saying that. In a merciful society, in a wealthy, abundant society like ours, we should be able to do that. But this whole idea that a Christian man would defraud the government, would make it his aim in life to get on disability. Now, this gentleman that helped me in my business wasn't a Christian, but I just used that to illustrate the point. God does not intend for men to be supported like that. God does not intend for his families to be on the government dollar. Now, here's the weakness of doing that. And this is a weakness in Social Security, too. You need to know this. As long as the government is paying your bills, they have control over you. They have power over you. And, there was back a few months ago when this COVID-19 thing hit and the stimulus was passed, there's a provision in the stimulus bill where churches could file and get their payroll paid by the government if their donations, if their charitable giving was down. And Pastor James and I talked about it, and we were just like, absolutely no way, Jose, are we going to take a nickel from the government. Because once they get you tied into them, then they've got their fingers in you. And then they can start saying, okay, you took money, therefore you must do this, therefore you must do that. I had an uncle who's now passed away when I was doing my handyman business. He called me up. He was a nice guy, but he wasn't a righteous guy. But he called me up and he said, hey, Wes, I hear you got a business going, and most of my work was over in Myrtle Beach, not in Andrews. There wasn't any money in Andrews. If you've ever been through there, you know what I mean. But he said, yeah, I've always wanted to live at the beach. I love the beach. Why don't you let me come down there, and I will, I'll work for you and I'll help you out. And he said, but I get Social Security, so you're going to need to pay me under the table. See, that's fraud. That's fraud. And I said, no, there's no way I'm paying you under the table. If you want to come down here and earn money. And I told him, I said, look, how much do you make? How much do you get for Social Security? And he gave me a number. It wasn't much, $2,000 a month or $1,500 a month or whatever. And I said, don't you see that because you're now locked into them, you are locked into this low level of income, so that you're trying to defraud the government in order to get your income up. I said, forget about Social Security. Forget about them. If you can work. Send the Social Security back to the government and work. And don't let the government set the income level that you can have. So anyway, that's a lot of discussion just to say that God does not desire, except in certain circumstances when there really is a need, that His people, His men, allow their families to be supported by the government. It keeps you from earning all that you could earn and having a standard of living that is good, and it also allows a pagan government to get his fingers into your life, and you don't want to do that. So how much does a man need to earn? How much does a man need to earn? You say, okay, Wes, I see what you're saying there. A man is to work and he's to provide for his family. But how much or how fully is he supposed to provide for his family? How much does he need to earn? And really, this question goes back to the woman's role. When we look at what we have to say, what is God requiring of the woman? And then what share of the income provision does that push over onto the man? And we see, as we talked about last time, that God requires the woman during the period of the children being at home, He requires that women stay home with the children and invest in the children. And the women can work before, the women can work after, they can work even during, as long as it doesn't interfere with that, as long as the children are not pushed out of the home to be raised by someone else. And we talked about all that last time. You can check that out later if you want to. But here's the verse here. Titus 2, 4, and 5, Paul says that the older women should admonish or teach the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be homemakers. Homemakers. They are to rule the house. The house is their domain. They are to invest their time and energies there. Now, what that means is that the provision of the family in terms of the income falls completely upon the man, upon the husband, upon the father. The man needs to earn enough to cover the entire expense load of the family. Now, let me point out here that that means everything that the family needs. Everything that the family needs. Now, in our culture today, you need to be able to earn enough money for medical insurance. You need to be able to earn enough money for food and clothing, provision and education. You need to earn enough money to be able to get life insurance for yourself, to protect your family in case you are harmed. So there's this whole package of things that we need to earn money for. Now let me also point out that it is not God's will, again, with exceptions, that a man work enough to provide for the food, but then rely on the government to provide some of these other benefits. That's not God's will. God wants you completely off of the government take, if with exceptions. Hear me when I say that. Don't say Wes said if you got both of your legs broken and your neck broken and you're a vegetable, you got to get out there and work. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is a healthy man needs to get himself out of the house and provide for his family. If he doesn't make enough money to cover the medical expenses, if he doesn't make enough money to cover all the food, he needs to work more. He needs to get a better job and work more. All right? The man is responsible for the entire provision for the family. And you go, wait a minute here, Wes. Do you know how expensive it is to live today? Do you know, I absolutely know. I have 4 children. I have 4. So yes, I know. We talk about all the things that we have to pay for. We have all the different things today that we didn't have even when I was growing up. We have the internet bill that we have to pay for. We have cell phones we have to pay for. We have just all of these costs that we didn't have before. So you're saying, Wes, how in the world can I possibly do that? Well, there are 2 things that you're going to have to do here. Once you realize that God wants you working, and He wants your wife home with your children, and that the responsibility for all the provision of that household is going to fall on you, there are 2 things that you can do, 2 things that you have to go back and rethink. And this is why God maybe is sending you back home. Number 1, you have to reconsider what your needs are. You have to reconsider what your needs are, and notice I have those in quotation marks. And then you have to increase your value. So I'm talking to the men now. You have to reconsider what your family's needs are, and then you have to look to increase your value in the workplace. Let's look at this first one. Considering what your needs are. Do you really need all that stuff? Do you really need all the things that you have? Step back for a moment and ask yourself. Let's look at what the Bible tells us. Let's go back to God's standard of what your needs are. All right? 1 Timothy 6 through 8. Paul says, "Now godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content." So what is he saying here? He's saying that if we're godly and following Christ, and we're content with what we have, we are greatly rewarded. That's a great place to be, godly and content. And then he deals with the thing that makes us discontent, and that is the amount of stuff that we have. And he reminds us that we didn't come into this world with anything, and you're not taking it out when you leave. So food and clothing, the basic necessities of life, are what we need and what we should be content with. Now that doesn't mean we can't have anything other than food and clothes. We can't have a home, we can't have a car. That's not what he means. He's simply stripping it down to saying, look, all these things that you think you need, you don't actually need. Remember, men, you've got to provide for this family. So the first thing you have to do is say, well, what do we really need? Talk to your wife. Well, what in God? What do we really need? Jesus said something very interesting in Luke 12 on this point. And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." He says, be careful about covetousness. Covetousness is essentially jealousy over other people's stuff. It's materialism. I want what he has. I want all the things that my buddies have, all the gadgets that my buddies have, all the things that my neighbors have. And then he says, one's life. Now this is Christ. Now this is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, walking around, as James said this morning, deity in the flesh, almighty, omnipotent, who knows everything. The Creator himself says, look, let me tell you something, men. Let me tell you something, moms. Let me tell you something, dads. Your life's value is not tied to how much stuff you have. Now, in America, we have so much that it's difficult for us to disconnect ourselves from our stuff. But I remember back in 2012, I was laid off from my work, and I had gotten this job coming out of my ministry I had used all of my retirement in ministry trying to get a ministry started, and so I was broke. We were broke. And then I lost my job. And it was 2012, and so at that time, the 2008 collapse we were still recovering from that. So there's nobody buying houses. We had a big house payment, a nice big house, and one by one we lost everything. The house, we sold the house, we sold it for a loss. We ended up moving in with Dana's parents. They bought our food. I went on unemployment. Everything that we had, we stuffed in just a bin of one of those things that you rent to store your goods, a storage bin there. And we basically were stripped down to just about nothing. I didn't have my own home. I wasn't buying my own groceries. We couldn't go out to eat. We couldn't do anything. And I want to tell you, it touched, it hurt me deep inside. I realized how much my life was connected to the things that I had. When you don't have these things that you sort of base your life on, it was shocking inside to me. The things that, the depth of the connection I had between myself and physical objects. And Jesus is saying, Wes and everybody else, your life is not connected to that. But I want to tell you, it was a brutal lesson. Speaking of Dana's family, Dana's grandmother, got a couple of pictures of her here. Her name was Mary Padoka, and she lived into her early 90s. She's Dana's grandmother on her mother's side. So it's her mother's mother. And sweetest lady, sweet old godly woman, loved the Lord. Well, when Dana and I met, she was probably in her 80s, and little short lady. Dana got that curse from her grandmother. I think all the women on Dana's side are short. But she would come down and stay with Dana's mom. She lived in Ohio, and she would come down and stay with Dana's mom. And Dana's mother was very close with her mother, and they looked just alike. But her name was Mary Padoka, and I remember talking to her, and I was a very young man at the time, so she seemed to me like a very old lady. At the time, she was probably 4 times my age. But I remember, one of the things I remember about Mary was how sharp her mind was. Even into her late 80s, I mean, she was extremely sharp. She could remember things. She had a very sharp wit. She was an intelligent woman, and I enjoyed talking to her and listening to her. But Mary was a woman who lived through some very desperate times. On the left here, you see her photo with her husband. She was a young bride during the Depression, and her husband died when her youngest was early teens. But her parents were first-generation Yugoslavian immigrants, so they came over to the U.S. and settled. And her father, Mary's father, lived here in the U.S. and worked for a number of years to send money back home to bring his wife and daughter, which would have been Mary. I believe it was Mary. No, it was her brother. But anyway, these people lived through a lot of very difficult times. And then when her husband passed, she had to take a job, and then she had children that she had to take care of. So she lived through some very desperate times. And I remember talking to her one day, and I remember something that she said to me that I've always remembered, and this has been almost 30 years ago now. And we were talking about the things that they had to do during the Depression and things that she had to do when she was raising her children, when it was just her working for a very, very low wage. And she said something to me. She looked at me and she said, "Wes, you'll be surprised how little you actually need." Now here's a woman who lived through the Depression. Here's a woman whose parents couldn't even speak English. Here's a woman who was widowed with children at home, who had to work in a factory at night. Dana says she worked at night because they paid better. So she had to go to work at night. And, you know, this is a woman who's lived through so much. And she says, you'll be surprised how little you actually need. After she died, Dana sews and Mary sewed quite a bit. So nobody else in the family sewed apparently, so Dana was given all of her grandmother's sewing materials. And Dana said she just had tons of sewing materials. But she said she had all of these little short pieces of thread. She said all these wads of little short pieces of thread. And Dana said she was so frugal she never threw anything away because she thought, when am I going to need this little short piece of thread? And how many times that little short piece of thread came up. But that just shows you the abundance that we have now. And you have this woman saying, look, families, you don't need all of that stuff. So I've never forgotten the words of Mary Padoka. She was a very wonderful woman, and a good mother, I know, and a good grandmother to Dana. And I hope those words will help you. You don't need all that stuff. There are more important things than things. Let's look into the scriptures here and see. There's more important things than things, everybody. Look at this, Proverbs 15:17. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. So the Bible's saying, look, it's better to have love than to have wealth. If you don't have love, it's better not to have wealth and have love. So love is more important than wealth. Better is a little with righteousness than vast revenues without justice. So it's better to be just and right than it is to be rich. See that? There's something better. Remember, Jesus says your life does not consist in the abundance of the things that you possess. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. It's better not to have much and have a peaceful, quiet, loving home than to have riches and to have a house full of fighting. There are more important things than things. Let's think about some things that we think we need that we don't actually need. Cars. You know, you don't need 2 cars. You know, you don't even have to have 1 car. You could use Uber, you could get the bus, you could live somewhere where you could take transportation. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm not saying you go and do that. I'm just saying you realize you don't have to have 2 or 3 cars. You realize you don't have to have a new car. You don't have to have a new car. Clothes, you have to have clothes, of course, but you don't have to have clothes from the Gap. You don't have to have clothes from Kohl's. You don't even have to have clothes from Walmart. When we were, over the years that we were in ministry and struggling financially, we bought almost everything that we had from Goodwill. Everything that I wore was from Goodwill. And now, you know, we really spend a lot when we go to Walmart and buy clothes. You don't have to have expensive clothes. Gadgets, you don't have to have every gadget there is. There don't need to be 4 TVs in your house. You don't have to have that. You don't have to eat out. You realize that? You do not have to eat out. Just do some math. How much do you spend eating out a week? You don't have to do that. And friends, if you're going to be able to keep your wife home and take care of your children, you might not be able to eat out. And you don't have to have youth sports. Not enough time to go into detail about this, but I've seen so many Christian families get caught up in this whole youth sports thing. It's really idolatry, the way that it's done today. You can't just play ball today. You have to play ball and travel every weekend and practice every night. I've seen Christian families spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a month traveling on youth sports leagues. And my friends, be careful what you wish for. I've heard so many of them, they say, well, maybe he can get a scholarship, or maybe he'll play pro ball. Be careful what you want, friends. You want your son to get a scholarship and go away to a 4-year college where he's going to learn from atheists and pagans every day and live in a dorm where they drink and have sex all the time? Is that what you want? Be careful what you wish for. There's a reason God has given us the Word, and there's a reason God has tried to protect us from some of these things. You don't need all of those things. And my friends, you definitely don't need this. You don't need debt. You don't need debt. Think about it. How many Christian families, if they could get rid of their debts today, could have the wife stay home? And how many go out? And look, we've done it too. I'm not condemning. I'm not looking down like I've never made any mistakes. I'm just trying to put the mirror up and let you see. You know, a young family with young kids, and we did it too. You go out and you end up buying a bigger house and a bigger house and a bigger house, and pretty soon, and a bigger car, and your kids are playing sports, and the next thing you know, you can't. You both have to work, and you're both deep, deep in debt. You don't have to be in debt. You don't need debt, friends. If you got rid of your debt, what would you be able to do? I mentioned this last time, and I'll mention it again briefly. Oh, it's really a matter of priority. You see, you don't have enough money. You're not Michael Jordan or someone else who's super wealthy. You have to make choices. You have a limited amount of resources. And so you're going to have to make some choices. And it really comes down to what's the most important. And what I'm trying to convince you of in this series is that the most important thing are your children, and keeping them home and training them to be godly. That's the most important thing. And we talked about these verses from Jesus last time, and I want to bring these up one more time. Mark 8:36 and 37. Jesus says, "For what will it profit?" Now, I've changed these words to apply to a father. And I want to show you something about these 2 verses that's very fascinating. Men, I want you to think about it. What will it profit a father and a mother if they gain a big house, important careers, and a full bank account, and lose their own children? Or what will a father or mother give in exchange for the souls of their children? What Jesus is doing here is he's actually putting the person in 2 different perspectives about the past and the future. In the first verse, he's asking you to sit where you are now and look out into the future and say, what is it going to profit you when you get all the way out to the end of the judgment, when you get to the end of your life and you're looking, what is it going to profit you then if you've lost your children? All right? And then in the next verse, he's asking you to turn the other way. And he's saying, now go to the end and think about yourself sitting there on your deathbed, realizing that your children were lost to the world. They became pagan idolaters. They didn't go to church. They didn't love God. They were condemned. And then ask, what would you give? What would you give then? You see, he's asking you to look at it both ways. Priority is the issue. What is the priority for you? And I'll say again to you, mothers and fathers, you absolutely cannot afford not to keep your wife home, not to have the husband earning the full living. You can't afford not to. You can't afford not to. I want to mention something to you here. You may need, as you look at your finances, as you think and pray about this, you might think, goodness gracious, Wes, we are so upside down. There's no way we can get to where we need to get so that we can I can bring my wife home and I can make enough money to cover all of the expenses that we have. There's a guy named Dave Ramsey. A lot of you have heard of Dave Ramsey, wonderful Christian teacher on the subject of finances, Christian finances. If you go to daveramsey.com and check out what he has, a great resource for you for trying to turn yourself around financially. Well, let's briefly hit how to increase your value. So we're looking at what your costs are. Now we want to look at what your value is and how much income you can make. You see, because the goal here is to get your expenses down. That's how you have to be thinking if you want to bring your wife home with the children and you want to be able to earn enough income to cover your family's expenses. You need to get your expenses down, but then you also need to get your income up. You get your income up. And this is a long-term goal, all right? So if you're sitting there tonight and you're feeling convicted about this and you're wondering how you're going to do it, you won't do it overnight. It's going to take you some time. But you can do it over the long term, and that's part of why I'm trying to help you here. How do we get our income up, men? How do we get our income up? You see, what you have to realize is there are certain jobs that pay more than others. And not every man can run a Fortune 500 company. That's not what I'm suggesting. But every man must try to put himself in a position where he can maximize the amount of money that he can earn, given his skills and abilities, given his natural talent and so on. So you might be able to become a Fortune 500 CEO. I'm not sure you'd want to do that, but you might have that kind of skill. But I don't have that kind of skill, so I wouldn't be able to get to that level of income. But I can get as high as I can get under God with what He has given me, so that I can provide the most for my family. But what we have is, generations of young men like myself who were not raised with fathers to help guide us in that area. So we end up taking whatever job that we can find, or whatever we seem to be good at, or whatever opportunity opens up. There's no strategic thinking about what can Wes really be good at, and what can Wes make a really good income at. I'm not saying you're striving to be rich. I'm just saying you're striving to make as much as you can make for your family so that you can cover those costs. Well, what it comes down to with so many of us is retraining. That what we have to do, men, is if you're in a job that's kind of a dead-end job, if you're in a position where you can't, there's just no good ceiling for you. You're not going to make enough in that job. Then you have to step back and start to ask God and look for where you can be. What training can I get? How can I improve my value in the market so that I can go out there and get a job that allows me to make enough to cover my family, to take care of my family? Again, the goal is not to be rich. The goal is not to work 80 hours a week and drive a Mercedes. That's not what I'm saying. But just that you would have that amount that we all know it takes to cover a family, even when you get your expenses down. There's something over the years that God has helped me to develop, and it's a way to think about where a man or a woman, this applies to both men and women, what you should do in a career. So for my men tonight, or young men that might be listening, or young women that might be listening, or parents that are listening, if you will remember this analogy, it will help you guide your children, it will help you guide yourself into the right career path. All right, so if you've ever fired a rifle, now I haven't fired a lot of rifles, but I have fired them. You've got two sights on a rifle. You've got the rear sight, which you see here in this picture. You've got the rear sight right here, and then you've got the front sight. And what you do with a rifle, you're trying to point the barrel towards a target. So you put the front sight in the rear sight opening, And that tells you that you are pointing the gun in a direction. And then you line those 3 up to hit the target. So you put the front sight in the rear sight, and you put the front sight itself on the target. You have a straight line between these 3 things, and you will hit the target. Well, here is the analogy to help you know how to figure out a career for you or your children or your wife or whatever. The rear sight, the first thing, the closest to you, is your interests. What are you interested in? This is the broad kind of spectrum. That's where you start. And the way you answer this is, what do you like to do when you don't have to do something? Are you drawn to cars? Are you drawn to engineering things? Are you drawn to writing? Are you drawn to carpentry? Are you drawn to mathematics? What is it that you just find yourself interested in? All right, that's the first thing. That's the rear sight. And then you look towards the front sight. All right, now I've got a set of interests. Now I ask myself, what am I good at? Within that set of interests, what am I good at? What do I find myself good at? And usually there's a relationship between these 2 things. If you're interested in things, you're normally going to be good at them. We're usually not interested in things that we're not any good at. So you say, what am I naturally good at? Where are my skills? Now we're starting to get this alignment a little bit better. So we got interest and skills, and then we look at the target. And the target is when we ask, okay, given my interests and my skills, what jobs out there are jobs where I can earn a good income in that interest and skill area? Do you see that? So for example, let me give you an example. Both of my sons are interested in computers. They've always shown interest in computers. They build computers. They know a lot about computers. They Google and read up on computer related stuff. They're both different in the things that they're interested in, but that broad area is computers. And so, I've prayed about that for years. Lord, show me what their interests are, and then show me what their skills are. And then we start to see that both of my sons are skilled in different areas of computers. My oldest son is more technical. He builds computers and networks, and he likes the technical nitty-gritty. But my youngest son is more interested in the design and the graphic piece and websites and stuff like that. So you start to look at those. You got interest, and then you've got skills, and then you go out and you look at income. And so we started to ask, well, given the things you're interested in, given the skills, where can you make the most income? Again, not that wealth is the goal, but where can you maximize it, and will you like it? And so with one of our sons, the oldest, what we landed on is cybersecurity. Now he could have looked at being a network administrator, but a network administrator doesn't make that much. They're a dime a dozen, and they don't make that much today. So you look at that target, you've got to move to another target. You've got to find another place to find income. And then my youngest son's, his interests presently lie in web design and that kind of thing. But you see the point. The point is you have to do this, and that bullseye is income. If you take something you're interested in and you're skilled at, and you find a job where you don't make any money, then you haven't fully maximized what God has for you and for your family. And men, you just can't do that. You have to get a job where you can make enough money for your family. That's a responsibility of yours. So you have to try and choose something that is like that. Now, let me just say something here as we wrap up. First of all, if you're a father now and you've got a wife and children, and you want to be able to move yourself towards bringing your wife home, this could be very daunting. You're going to have to work very hard. You're going to have to work harder than you ever had. You're going to have to get the training. Let me go back here and just real quick. So this skills part of it, let's say that I've got the skill is where we have to get ourselves trained. We know we have interest in an area, and then we know where we're going to try and land in terms of income. So we have to go look for training opportunities, whether that's technical school, some kind of a certification class or a degree, whatever that is. So a man is going to have to do that, and that is going to be very hard. And this is where your wife is going to have to support you. You're going to have to do some research, figure out what the training is that you need, figure out a way to pay for it. And thankfully in the United States there are a lot of great programs to help you do that. And then you're going to have to work out a way for you to spend the time while you're working to get some additional training. And that's going to be very hard. But I also wanted to say, so don't back down from that, expect that. That's the way that it works. But I also wanted to just say this. When you fully begin to understand God's design, when you see that God wants your wife home to care for the children, you begin to be convicted about how important that is. And then you start to look at all the expenses that you have. And you have to, even when you cut your expenses, you realize how much money it takes. And it does, friends. It takes a lot of money. It takes a significant amount, even when we cut back. You know, that can be overwhelming. And it is. You realize, and I can say this as I've been the primary breadwinner since my children were born. The only breadwinner. It is extremely difficult as a man. It is lonely. You realize that all of these souls rest upon you. That you know, I don't have a dad to come bail me out. I know a lot of you don't. I don't have family that'll bail me out. I mean, there's me. You know, I'm plan A, I'm plan B, and I'm plan C. And you know, sometimes when I'm doing the budget and I'm trying to figure out how to make the numbers work, and I'm trying to earn the income and sticking in jobs that I don't necessarily like that much because I have to, because I've got to earn the income, it is so hard. It is heavy. It is a heavy burden to carry, and you realize that to some extent it's all on you. And you say, how can I do it? And what we're going to see in our next session, I'll go ahead and point out now. This thing is designed so that you need Christ to help you get through it. That in fact, point of fact, you're not alone. Christ is with you. And so for you to be this leader in the home, this leader in provision, you have to turn to Him. You know, you're going to have to go to Him if you realize that you've been sinning in these areas. Maybe you haven't been working like you should, or, you know, whatever the situation is. You're going to have to turn to Him and repent, and you're going to have to turn to Him and say, Lord, help me. You know, help me to find the training. Help me to figure out what I need to do. Help us with this transition. Help me to earn enough money. Help me to carry this burden, because it's a heavy, heavy burden. But He will help you. And I can tell you that this is going to make you stronger. It's going to make you a better man, a tougher man. You're going to be able to carry more weight. And that is then going to cause you to be more of a tool that He can use to do other things. So when we stick with God's design, the difficulty that comes with the design also develops us so that we can be used greater in the design. So this design, this thing that Christ is maybe laying upon your heart tonight, I know that it's hard. I know that it feels heavy. I feel it myself. But Christ is there, and you must lean on Him for help.